tired of hearing things from uptight, short-sighted, narrow-minded hypocrites. All I want is the truth. Just give me some truth. I didn't make a video immediately after the massacre of 26 people, 20 children and 6 adults in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, because I wanted to see how things would develop. But now they have developed, I'm going to do a video of a similar style to the one which I did on the Aurora Batman killings, and that is Sandy Hook, coincidence theory or conspiracy theory. Well, the first thing that I'm going to look at is the dates of all the massacres that have taken place recently in the United States. The first one of note was the shooting of Gabrielle Gifford, the United States Senator, and that was on January the 8th, 2011. And then there was very little, as far as I'm aware, until Aurora Batman killings, which were on July the 20th, 2012, so over a year later. There was another one, just to remind you of the problems of guns in the Sikh temple on August the 5th, 2012, and a relatively small mall shooting near Wisconsin on August the 21st, 2012. Then you have a bit of a break while the election campaign goes on, and the election was on November the 6th, 2012. Then immediately after the election has ended is the relatively small Oregon Mall massacre, in which 3 were killed, and that was of course followed by this terrible tragedy at Sandy Hook on December the 14th, 2012. So you can see that there is an acceleration of these killings taking place, but there was a very convenient gap during the election campaign. And also you can note that the Sandy Hook massacre has taken place at the most emotive time possible, that is, just before Christmas. And to kill 20 children immediately before Christmas is unthinkable. But of course the coincidence theorists would say that this was just coincidence. The conspiracy theorists would say that if this young man Adam Lanza was unhinged, it was a bit of a coincidence that he happened to become unhinged so near to Christmas when he was actually killing children, and therefore it would have the most emotive impact. And you also can be aware, if you've been following things in the United States as I have, that there has been an acceleration of the campaign on the part of Obama to ban guns. And I'll be talking about that a bit later in the video. So the question is, was this a false flag event, or was it just an incomprehensible shooting by a deranged man? I recently mentioned false flag events to someone and they asked me what I meant. So I'm going to explain what a false flag event is. It's where a government blames some atrocity on its worst enemy and uses that atrocity as an excuse to start a war. The sinking of the Lusitania was thought to be a false flag event, and there was even a suspicion that the burning of the Reichstag was a false flag event. And there have been many, many others. So what I want to introduce is the concept of domestic false flag events. And what I mean here is, I'd like to ask the question, was the shooting at Sandy Hook done in order to blame gun owners and demonize them with a view to removing guns from the American people in order to bring in a world government? This, at any rate, is what the conspiracy theorists would say. Now, one of the things I notice generally is that the globalists, when they want to make use of an atrocity like this, they usually try to make that atrocity serve a number of purposes, not just one purpose. So if we look at the detail of this case, what do we see? Well, we see first of all that Adam Lanza's mother was a homeschooler. And the globalists would be very much against that, because homeschooling encourages family values. They don't want that. They want to have children under the control of the state. So that was the first point. The next point was that Adam Lanza's mother was a prepper, and they made quite a lot of that. Now, if you don't know what a prepper is somebody who is preparing for an economic collapse, which is not an unreasonable thing to do in view of what's happening in the world at the moment, if you've got any awareness of what's happening. But the American government, I've been following it very closely, has been demonizing preppers. And there was a very well publicized case in which someone was prevented from boarding a plane simply because the FBI said that this person was a prepper. He was left stranded to pay all his hotel expenses, which is really quite incredible. So preppers are not popular with the New World Order. And another reason they're not popular is because they have stored food in case of an economic collapse, and some of them, well, most of them, have guns, because you need guns if there is an economic collapse to protect your food supplies. Finally, Adam Lanza is reported to have had Asperger's syndrome, and the globalists, I believe, are going to turn on the disabled eventually. That has happened throughout history when there's been totalitarian regimes. I know we had the Paralympics in London very recently, but if you were following it closely, you would have noticed that the BBC put out a programme in which they used the Paralympics as an excuse to suggest that anybody who is not born perfect should not have been born in the first place, and they put out a eugenics program which I reported on in one of my videos. So the conspiracy theorists would say that the Lanza family was deliberately chosen as a target because it represented so many issues that the globalists wanted to put down in front of the public. And the coincidence theorists would say no, it was just a coincidence that the family happened to represent a number of issues dear to the globalists. The coincidence theorists would say that Adam Lanza had Asperger's syndrome, that he was deranged, and that was why he killed the children. The conspiracy theorists would say no, Asperger's syndrome is a form of high-functioning autism, and it's not normally associated with violence. The conspiracy theorists would say that the fact that Adam Lanza had Asperger's syndrome meant that he was under the care of a psychiatrist, which would mean that the globalists had access to records about him, and he could have been targeted for mind control. The conspiracy theorists would say that the fact that Adam Lanza's mother was a prepper and had a gun meant that before she got the gun, she had to have FBI background checks. So again, she would have been known to the authorities, which means that this would have given the authorities knowledge which could have caused it to target this particular family as being ideal in putting forward what it wanted the public to hear. Up to this point, the evidence that I've presented has been really circumstantial evidence, nothing concrete, just suggestive. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty of what happened, there are huge comparisons with the Aurora Batman shooting and other atrocities too. And the first thing I want to deal with is the confusion that took place, and that's been a feature of all these atrocities. In the Aurora shootings, we were told originally that the mother had said, "You've got the right man," and then it turned out that that was, well, they said, a misunderstanding. There was lots of confusion. There was a drill at a local university. If you look at the atrocities of 9/11 and 7/7 and also Oklahoma, there were drills going on at the same time. And the conspiracy theorists would say that these drills happen in order to cause confusion, so that when later discrepancies in the account come out, people don't pay very much attention to them because they're used to the idea that things don't really tie up. And here again, with this shooting at Sandy Hook, we have similar confusion. We were told at the beginning that the mother worked at the school, that she was a teacher there. We were told at the beginning that it was the older brother who did the shooting. And, you know, this, conspiracy theorists, of course, would say, is done deliberately, so that now that all the discrepancies have emerged, and I'm going to talk about those in a moment, nobody pays much attention to them, because there are all sorts of strange things that have happened prior to these discrepancies coming forward. So the most important discrepancy was the number of shooters that were involved. In all the atrocities, we are told by the globalists that there was a lone shooter. And the conspiracy theorists, of course, would say that the point of saying that there's a lone shooter is that that person can be just somebody who's deranged, whereas if there are a number of shooters involved, then it tends to point more to a conspiracy. So it's very funny that all of these killings that go on around the world, and particularly in America, tend to be lone gunmen who are just deranged. There seem to be rather a lot of them, it seems to me. And the conspiracy theorists, of course, would say that it's a little bit strange that somebody with Asperger's syndrome should have done this, because the characteristics of Asperger's sufferers, and I have had a lot of dealings personally with these, with people who have this problem, one of the characteristics that they have is that they hate anything that is outside the normal routine. They feel threatened by any situation outside their normal experience. And so the idea of this 20-year-old going into a school full of strangers and shooting up 20 little kids and their teachers is really quite unusual, I would say. And I've also mentioned the fact that I'm not aware of Asperger's syndrome having in itself an association with violence. It might be quite different if this person was taking drugs. And the conspiracy theorists point to more than one shooter. And I've put a link to a video that I saw on YouTube, which I think was quite compelling, which plays quite a lot of actual footage from the atrocity itself. It's not very good sound quality, but it's quite interesting to hear what was actually said. And it seems as though there were 3 shooters at least, including Adam Lanza himself. I think it's worth you listening to the film, which I've provided a link for underneath this video. On it there was a very intelligent little boy who said he saw someone pinned to the floor and handcuffed, and that obviously wasn't Adam Lanza. Teachers reported having seen 2 shadows passing the window. The gun that was supposed to have killed the children had been left in the car and was not on the person of Adam Lanza. And as Dr. Paul Craig Roberts recently wrote in an excellent essay, one of many that he writes, he pointed out the mystery of someone who emerged from the woods. And apparently this person turned to the parents and said, "I didn't do it." And Dr. Paul Craig Roberts has pointed out the fact that if he'd just emerged from the woods, how on earth would he have known what had happened? So that's another unexplained thing about this tragedy. And there are lots of unexplained points. In other words, discrepancies which people are now tending to ignore because of the confusion at the beginning of the tragedy. I think the globalists know the psychology of this. Up to this point, I was still not completely sure whether this was a conspiracy to promote a gun ban or whether it was simply the act of a deranged man. There are 2 points which have pushed me personally towards the conspiracy theory. And the first is something I mentioned in the Aurora Batman video I made, and that is the presence of markers. Now, I don't know why the globalists seem to like to put these markers in to tell you about events before they happen, but it's happened so often that I really don't believe it can be a coincidence. I can speculate that it may well be a sort of cheerleading activity in which they're just telling people how powerful they are and boasting to their friends. Now, in the Batman movie, the map was apparently changed from the early Batman movies, where South Gotham City was shown as South Hinckley, and it was changed to Sandy Hook in this movie. And there is some focus on this in the movie, where the word Sandy Hook is actually pointed out, and in fact it's the only visible words on the map. Also, someone pointed out that one of the northern towns of Gotham City is called Newtown, and as we now know, the massacre took place in Sandy Hook, Newtown, Connecticut. It's also been pointed out that unaccountably the numbers 322 appear very prominently in the movie. These numbers are associated with the secret society Skull and Bones, which believes in ritualistic sacrifice, and we know that both the Bushes were members of Skull and Bones, and many of the elite are members of this secret society. Someone else has pointed out that the word Aurora was shown in neon lights in the film, and this obviously links with the Batman cinema killings that I did a video on earlier. I don't know about you, but I find it very difficult to believe that all these coincidences just happen to be coincidences. I can't buy into that, and I think you would have to be very gullible indeed to believe that to be the case. I'm just going to read to you the second point which has convinced me that this is more than just a coincidence. And that is this article here. It says, breaking news, CT and Aurora shooters' fathers linked to libel scandal. And I do know that the Aurora shooter's father was linked. He was due to give testimony in the libel case. The father of Newtown, Connecticut school shooter Adam Lanza is Peter Lanza, who is a VP and tax director GE Financial. I think that is true. That has actually been reported in the mainstream media as well. The father of Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooter James Holmes is Robert Holmes, the lead scientist for the credit score company FICO. Both men were to testify before the US Senate in the ongoing libel scandal. The London interbank offered rate, known as LIBOR, is the average interest rate at which banks can borrow from each other. I think we know all about the libel scandal. Update 2 says, I have been unable to validate that both of these men are set to testify in the libel case, but there is high level involvement in taxes and credit banking is a suspect for sure and worthy of a more in-depth analysis. And I would agree with that. And I have tried to check this as well, but I haven't been able to confirm or deny it. And it's hardly surprising, because when you think about it, the mainstream media gives you a diet of outright lies, half-truths, and important omissions. It does seem likely, it seems strange that both of these fathers were heavily involved in the financial industry. That is fact, I believe. And so it does seem likely to be the case. Certainly if you look at Adam Lanza's home, you can see that his father earned a great deal of money and probably was very high up in the financial industry therefore. So I think that would be a crucial point. If both of these fathers were due to give testimony in the libel case, that could be a very, very important motive for setting this family up. And I think this certainly deserves investigation. And the families of the victims should be asking for an investigation and demanding one, in fact. And an investigation in which the people preside over the investigation, not the globalists. Finally, I want to make it clear that one motive for actioning this massacre could be that of threatening a witness in the coming libel case. That may or not be true, but one thing is fairly clear, and that is that the most important motive of all, if this was a conspiracy, would be to get the guns out of the hands of the American people. And I'm going to give you the point of view of one UK citizen who is awake. I don't like guns. I'd prefer that there were no guns. But unfortunately, guns are freely available to the global elite. I've been watching over the past couple of years, I've watched the United States collapse into tyranny, and the UK is not far behind. I've seen and read of shocking events in which the TSA has shown scant regard for human dignity. I've watched American police kicking people to death and showing no mercy, even when their victims begged for mercy. I've seen people tasered for trivialities, and we've recently had tasers introduced to the UK, with the first reported misuse being the tasering of a blind man. So, no, I don't like guns, but do I want the United States citizens to keep their Second Amendment rights? You bet I do. Why, you may ask? Well, here's the reason. The Founding Fathers had a certain amount of wisdom in framing a constitution giving you, the American people, individual rights. They gave you the right to bear arms, and I've recently realized why that was there. Was it to enable you to go hunting? No, it was there to enable you to resist a tyrannical regime. My assessment of the situation at the moment is that the United States is at the forefront of the struggle against world government. I think the UK is next in line, and following on from that, I think, is Europe. I think that that's the order of tyranny. In some ways, the UK is ahead. For example, I think we've got far more cameras on the streets and that kind of thing, but I don't think we have the same behaviour at airports as yet, but it will come. So the reason I think that the globalists are concentrating on the United States is precisely because you have guns. In the UK, the citizens have nothing to protect themselves from a tyrannical regime, and therefore I think the whole world is relying now on the United States citizens to retain their Second Amendment rights in order to prevent the elite from taking over the world.